and God moves quickly, and it is always something going on. Isn't it great? Isn't it great to be alive? I'm just so thankful for living. Truly great to be alive.
Amen.
So thankful to get up today.
Amen. There's a lot going on in here. Talk about time passing in season 15, episode 3. I remember back years ago before the You Can Overcome show started, this started out as something that you called Lunch with Gwen. And it happened weekly in the afternoons around lunchtime. Well, you fast forward all these years later, and guess what happens every Monday? Lunch with Gwen. So, but on top of that, you get the You Can Overcome show every week. And so just a couple of quick announcements in case you're just joining us. This place is full of resources. If you wanted to be an expert at music, basketball, or medicine, or anything like that, and if you could have access to the person or the organization or where all the information was coming from, you would surround yourself with that, right? And Gwen, you've talked over the years about ways of escape. You talk about that scripture, and you've painted so many incredible word pictures about how you're tempted to eat when you're not hungry, and a fly will land in your food, or you'll spill your plate, or your dog will start licking the plate off the table, and that and many, many other things. You spill the M&M bag all over the floor. You have countless examples in all Gwen's materials, and those are ways of escape, and they kind of take you by surprise, but you know it's God. But where else would you have literally access to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week worth of ways of escape? Lunch with Gwen every Monday, all access, 24/7. God is constantly, and you said this a million times in a million different ways, God is constantly whispering to us, then shouting at us, trying to get our attention. And these resources, this stuff that God's pouring out through Gwen, all these words, these tapes, these audios, these videos, these writings, are a constant access to a way of escape. And so if you want to take advantage of those, surround yourself with them. Also, mentioning Lunch with Gwen, did you know you can listen to that on repeat and replay as a podcast?
All right.
As a podcast. Everybody know what a podcast is in the room? Okay, I didn't either. All right, so if you've got if you don't have a smartphone, then borrow one from somebody else. Or you can go to your computer. But if you have a smartphone, if you use Apple, iPhone, you can go to the podcast icon, the podcast app, search Gwen Shamblin Lara, Lara, and her podcast will pop right up, The Lunch with Gwen, past episodes. There it is, Mondays, noon Central Time. If you use Android, you can go to the Google store. I think it's called Google Play. Look for the podcast app. Open that up after you download it and search Gwen Shamblin Lara, Lara. You can find past episodes of the Lunch with Gwen episodes. And then this is really cool, especially for international members. Why are podcasts so cool? Because they don't use up your cellular data. I know a lot of you know what that means. Your plan can get really expensive if you're constantly using your phone on the go. But with podcasts, it doesn't eat up your data. So you get to listen to truth, and it doesn't eat into your cell phone plan. Even though it's way worth eating into your cell phone plan, it doesn't. So that's just a few ways that you can stay connected and get your ways of escape.
Beautiful announcements, David and Martin. Wow.
Well, I wouldn't have anything to announce. Nobody would be here if you didn't take all your time and your energy and be up all hours of the night getting this stuff written and recorded. Right, brothers and sisters?
When it's coming from God, it is easy. It's just like using your gift for anything. David Martin started singing at 2 years old, and it's like he could do it in his sleep. And so using our gifts for God is beautiful. But I will say that the Martin family has been here, the very first family that joined Remnant Fellowship Churches that started almost 20 years ago.
This mid-March will be the 20-year anniversary.
20-year anniversary is coming up. That's exciting. And I don't feel any different. I'm sure we look somewhat different, but at the same time, for the most part, we feel like we have found this eternally youthful situation inside the kingdom of God, and it's been beautiful. And the Martin family were the first to join, so they are incredibly special to all of us because the loyalty.
This is grateful. When you're, and I know our guests tonight will say the same thing. When you come early, you're also the most grateful because you got out of Egypt. You got out of your past nonsense life as quickly as you possibly could. So
Well,
what we've learned from you, it's
did.
saved a marriage, it's saved a family, and so we're so grateful.
Well, the Martin family is way up there on the list. Right in behind them is another family that is absolutely stellar, and they have done so much for this church, just like the Martin family, and they work around the clock, but they have, an incredible testimony. But I've watched their lives. I'm with them daily, and they have thrown themselves into the middle of the kingdom of God. Please join David and I in welcoming Patrick and Amy Stites.
You can be free, you can overcome, you can overcome. Up in heaven, angels dance 'cause they're free. Happy sing for eternity. Without God and His Son, Jesus, everything is peaceful and
Standing ovation. We don't have that every time. I'm just telling you. I mean, and that lets you know probably about where you'll be when you're standing in line with God and they're handing out the crowns and all that kind of stuff. I mean, because your lives are just both completely selfless. But I know, because I know the testimony, and I've been there for some of this transformation, it wasn't always that way. So they've got a beautiful testimony. So you guys take it away. I didn't ask who wanted to go first.
I think Amy wanted to.
What, Amy wants to?
It would be a better start if she started.
Okay, let her start then. We'll let her start.
Hopefully I've gotten to share my testimony a couple of times, but I can remember every part of it just like it was yesterday, even though it's been a while. And I was thinking this morning about the details of, it was in January, so this month, 22 years ago, that I took my first weigh down class. And I really didn't know what I was doing when I started the class, for sure. I just knew that I was hurting and I was depressed and had a lot of things going on, but I didn't quite understand it all. So I took my first class, and going back and looking at it, I started really getting focused on food in college. And so I did the typical gain the 15, freshman 15.
Didn't you played a lot of tennis in high
I
school?
did.
Right?
I played sports my whole life.
Right.
So,
and then tennis every day, which,
Yes.
I mean, that burns up a lot. So
It
you
did.
go into college, quit tennis.
and start eating and
Right.
doing all of that. And it completely worried me because I saw it happen fast. So I went to the extreme of exercising every day and not eating enough and controlling it with, control. But it made me think back to, as a child, I always had lots of anxieties and worries and fears and self-focus that I didn't really know what that was. I'd never been taught that. So when I got into college and went into this, I thought, well, I can just control everything. So the anxiety and the fear and the worries just consumed me. So then that just snowballed into this depression and everything else that was happening, and I just didn't know. So praise God that He led me to weigh down pretty quickly after I had graduated from college. We had just gotten married. We'd been married about 6 months at that point, and it was already hard because there's a lot of crying and anxiety, and I would exercise. At that point, I was exercising every morning for at least an hour and a half before work. And then if my work schedule allowed it, I would do another 2-hour workout in the afternoon. I was charting all of my calories on a spreadsheet, so I knew exactly how much I'd eaten every day. Every morning would wake up, thinking about counting the number of hours of sleep that I'd had, and then counting about the food that I could eat that day, maybe if I'd eaten too much the night before. So the whole self-focus and anxiety and worry consumed every day. It just was, what am I gonna eat? What can I not eat? And then controlling what he was eating, because it made me feel better if he ate something with a lot of high fat and I ate low fat. So I weirdly felt better about myself that way. So the whole thing is weird, I know it's weird.
That confession has not ever come out till tonight,
But it was hard, but the self-focus of just food was the main control. That was the main thing. And so, anyways, so I went through my first weigh down class, and I immediately knew, when I watched you on that first video, I knew that you had something that I had always wanted my whole life, but I didn't know how to verbalize that or say it. I didn't know that I wanted it, but I saw you talking about your love for God, and I thought, that's what I want. Like, who doesn't want this? I want that. And so I immediately felt hope. And then the more I listened to, so I started going to class and immediately started putting it into practice. And it was hard at times just to think like, I'm gonna eat bacon, I'm gonna eat stuff with fat in it. I was gonna start opening up this new life of eating regular foods.
It scared you.
It did scare me. But it started working, and I started getting answered prayers like, almost every day. And I started feeling I started feeling peace and joy and no anxiety, no worry, no crying, no more driving to the workout, place and sitting in the car and crying for an hour because I didn't want to go back in there. I was done with all of that, which it just was huge. And so that control that I let go of, because you were teaching about God's control, and I had never heard of that, like that he would make the decisions and it would be better that way. And it did, and it worked, and so I just wanted more and more of it, I was just so grateful for it. And I noticed that the control that I was trying to do was controlling my husband. We didn't have children at the time, and it was ruining our relationship, obviously, and there was a lot of pain there. So every day was just painful, and this completely reversed that to no pain, just love and joy. And so as I've watched you all these years, I just want to imitate that. Like, I always want to be like you because you're always free to love God because you're not loving yourself. I was like, if I can stop, being in love with myself, basically.
That's profound what you're saying.
I wanted to be
profound the way she's putting that. I mean, that's going to help a lot of people saying it like that. I mean, I've never even thought about that if you're, free of self, then I thought about it, but maybe not in those words.
Well, you taught it.
Well,
your life.
Just if you're free of loving yourself, then you can love God. I mean, you can love your spouse, you can love, your children, you can love everybody. I mean, if you're free of self. But if you're not free of self, then you're limited. You're limited in your love for God, you're limited in love for,
So that control of that stronghold in my life did control everything. It ruined everything. But when you're in the middle of it, it's hard to think, how do you get out of that? Or how do you...
Or what's the diagnosis?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems so normal to be self-focused. You've been brought up in this country to be self-focused, and you've been brought up that it is all about you and take care of number one and have some me time. And I could give you look up 1,000 ways that it's all about self. 99.9% of psychological counseling is having you lay down on the table and talk about yourself. Then they make up things, put things in your mind that's about self that's wasn't even there. I mean, it's amazing the more you can repeat and put stuff up in your head, but like you say, it can mess up your sleep, it can mess up it makes you depressed, all the worries, all the phobias. And then when you do that, then it transfers onto the spouse. So that segues into Patrick Stites. And then Patrick, you can tell us how God set you free from whatever, he's brought you through all these. How many years now have I known you guys? Or have you?
22 and a half years is when
it's way down, and then I met Patrick a few years later.
After that, yeah.
It probably is not enough to say that I like the new Amy a whole lot more than the old Amy. But what was very convicting about that, I'll never forget the first night she came home from her first weigh down class in tears because she knew she was changed. And we got married in June. That first class was in January. And I do remember thinking in those first 6 months, we promised we're gonna be married forever. And I thought, man, forever is gonna be a long time. Because there were some days that it was not as loving and peaceful as it is now. But she started changing, and it was very convicting to me because Dave and I have very similar backgrounds as far as growing up in the church, being there, all the time. But when I first met you 20-something years ago, I was a very prideful young man. I thought I had all the answers. I thought I knew. I had gone to a Christian school. I'd had Bible classes the whole time I was there and thought I knew what a Christian man was supposed to look like. And the reality was I was a Pharisee of Pharisees. And when she started changing, inside I thought, okay, my wife is beating me in this race. One of my favorite verses growing up was in 1 Corinthians where it says, do you not know in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way to get the prize. And I realized she was beating me in that race, but then I realized I wasn't even running the same race. I was on a completely different path. And so watching her change and lay down that control, at first was a little bit confusing because it's like, okay, where's the old Amy? Not that I want it back necessarily, but I like what's changing. And while I never considered myself a victim, I always thought everybody else was the one that should change, not me. And that was very convicting. Projection, right.
Judgmentalness, projection type of, yeah.
And David was very kind in those early years. He and I had a lot of lunches together where I was that pride and that control, and I think pride is just a form of control, it wanted so badly to hold on. Like it had those roots deep and didn't want to let go. And so he and I had the opportunity to have several lunches together and talk through that. And my upbringing was that women shouldn't have any role in teaching, which I learned pretty quickly that, as many of our men here have said, you have taught more men how to be men than any man that I ever heard talk. And so laying down that control and thinking that I had to have all the answers was revolutionary. And I would like to say that I picked it up as quickly as my wife, but I'm a very slow learner. But I did eventually see that difference and know what it meant to lay down that control. And I think one of the things that I learned from you through Way Down and then through these other leaders is I was brought up that a man is the head of the household. And in my old life, that definition meant the man was also the spiritual leader of the household. And ideally, that would be great unless the man is not a spiritual leader. And for many years early on in our marriage, and probably even as much so today, my wife was the spiritual leader of our household. And but yet she wasn't the head of the household because, right, as you've taught, there is a difference there. And so my children go to her many times more than they come to me about spiritual questions. And I'm okay with that because I know that she's following the Spirit. She's following what you've taught. And she's not trying to take control. She's trying to let God speak through her and speak through me. But she's always coming back to me and going, okay, what do you think about this? Should we do it this way? Should we do it that way? So learning to lay down that control and not worrying if God is speaking through her when maybe he isn't speaking through me. That's okay.
That's beautiful.
If God shares with her.
That's incredible testimony. It's very needed.
Well, it's learned, and as Amy and I talked about, everything that we do, we're just imitating. Like we're very good imitators, I think. So we're just watching what you do and the Martins and the Anjays.
The only saved people would be the ones that are willing to say, I need to change and I want to imitate Christ, imitate. The whole thing's about imitation. We're all born imitators until we hit a level of pride that we don't need to imitate anybody else. We are the source of all information. But ideally, we would be being transformed the rest of our lives by surrounding ourselves by people that are worthy of emulation, and then we put that into practice. But you were referring to gifts. How that works, if people are confused, the men are the head of the household, but a wise man, like there would be men that would come to me and they would say, well, my wife is like better at accounting, but as a husband, I'm supposed to be taking care of all the money, and I'm supposed to be, I go, I don't know where you heard that. If you read Proverbs 31, there's a lot going on there that the woman was taking care of, but she's buying real estate, buying property. She was, running businesses and that type of thing. It's all gifts. It's all gifts driven. And so if there's someone and is more passionate, and you're a wise husband. It's like the boss has these employees, and if this one is better at accounting, but this one over here is better at marketing, and this one over here is better at production, then the wise one is going to utilize the gifts. And so you say, okay, kids, you're going to go over here and right now to Amy because she is the spiritual. I mean, God's gifted her with this. I mean, you look in there and see, who is it? He said it was the woman that had, he had 4 daughters that prophesied, right? With Acts, what was it? I'm trying to think of the different situations that men were married to like a prophetess, and that runs in and out and weaves itself all the way through the Bible. But it didn't. It like when it wasn't Hezekiah's reform, but Josiah. I think it was Josiah's reform. He was just a young boy, but when he found the scripture, then he took it to the prophetess. And so all the men were coming to the prophetess. They weren't sitting there saying, well, she's got a gift, but she's female. She has female hormones, therefore she can't get a gift from God. And, if we have a male hormone, then we have all the gifts. I mean, the Jewish people that never crossed their minds. I mean, that Deborah who judged for 40, it didn't cross. You go with whatever gift that God gave you. Anyway, so coming from my background, I'm thinking I can't utilize my gift because I'm a woman. He thinks he can't utilize my gift either because I'm a woman. And so we were in agreement. But as it turned out, we were both wrong, and that God uses and speaks through whomever he chooses, and then you've got to accept that. You've got to. There are a lot of times there were prophets that didn't want it, and they would ask God to save me from it. I don't want it. I was one of those that said, save me from it. I don't want this. I specifically asked 3 times, 3 specific times, and God did not let me abort the mission that he'd called me to. So bottom line, you utilize that. And then Amy's going to you, though. I mean, like, what a team. Y'all are working constantly, and with it, look how much y'all get done because you're utilizing the gifts and utilizing your gifts. Your gifts abound. It wasn't like you were left out. You have a million gifts, and that's a beautiful testimony. I just wanted to reemphasize it.
Well, it is, what's amazing is the peace that comes from that, because I realized pretty early on my gift is not picking out clothes. Therefore, she picks out my clothes, or I would look much worse than I do when I walk out of the house every morning. My gift is also not decorating, but that's okay. I don't want to decorate, right? But like you said, God has given us all different gifts. I would love to be able to play the guitar, but that's not one of my gifts. There are other things. And I think what I've learned and what I continue to put into practice watching you and watching the other leaders is that God's going to use whoever he wants to use. So if I don't have that gift today, God may give me that gift at some point down the road when it's needed. And I've watched as these children have grown up and watched my children grow up, they have developed these gifts and they're very different. I mean, Wesley and Caroline are very different in their gifts, but yet they're still learning how to take those and not be controlling with that, but take those gifts and put them into practice. And I guess as I talk to, just like you're saying, you talk to men or you talk to women or these families, that you don't have to have the answer for everything. And I thought I had to have the answer for everything. But if you'll just trust that God's going to speak through your spouse, or maybe even speak through leadership, or maybe speak through a group of people, I've been amazed watching how things get done around here.
It's amazing.
The way prayers get answered and the way that families are changed and lives are changed and children are taken care of, it all happens because we're not trying to control it. And so that continues to amaze me. And we've been in lots of situations where like I don't know the answer, and then God comes back and makes it very, very clear.
Or Amy and I, we may not be that great with finances, so we come to you for like financial advice. And my goodness, you've got financial advice and you know, a lot of the church members. But I mean, all of the gifts together you're amazed at how all of this gets done. It's because everybody, the fish goes into the water, the bird into the sky. We're not trying to get people to go against, get their children to go against we're looking for God's gifts that he left, that Christ left in the train he talked about. You know, all these gifts, and then, you know, letting them learn everything they can at the youngest of ages about their gifts. And I mean, how many of us wish that we had found what our gifts were earlier in life?
Amen.
And then sometimes people found their gifts, but they were made to feel guilty about it. And you shouldn't be, that's not what you should be doing. And so it's something from inside. There's something about this message that is all about being from inside. So we're talking about control, and David, you jump in here too, but we're talking about control tonight. And I would tell you next to, I mean, you know, overeating is complicated, and you can't just sit there and say this is about overeating or it's about weight loss. I would say that one of the number one things that hinders success for anyone that comes to Jesus Christ, whether it is, I want to lay down that drinking, I want to lay down that overeating, I want to lay down that pride, I want to lay down over talking, over shopping, overly focused on self, phobias, fears, all these different things you want to lay down. But the number one foundation that's not checked a lot of times is how much control you have. And in this country, it is fed to you at a very early age. And you've been taught by some of these different, I guess they call themselves experts for child rearing or whatever, but it's like, don't hurt their ego and let them just do whatever they want to do when they want to do it. And so this focus on self and pleasing self and satisfying self, and focus on your desires and what you want, and not confronting it and ever teaching anyone to deny themselves. You've got this country full of, it's not true in all these other countries. There's a lot of religions that talks about denial. If you look at the world's religions, the Muslims, 2 billion?
Something like that.
2 billion Muslims. And, you know, they get all kind of bad raps and all kind of stuff. And I've always said, if what they were teaching was a lack of peace or terrorism, we'd all be gone with 2 billion of them on the planet. I mean, we'd be easily, you know, guerrilla'd out of here. And so, I mean, that's not what they're teaching. Their teaching is basically the Quran is a copy. It is Muhammad, if you'll look at it, he went in there and he translated into Arabic the Old and New Testament. So he's 600 years past Christ, and he's in there translating it. He just died 10 years later. And then whatever was added, there's a lot of stuff that's added. That'd be like, I wrote some books, and a lot of people several hundred years from now add all this text to what I've written and claim I've done all this stuff. But if you look at the original, some of the original things, there's just, it's just a lot of it. It's just the stories of the Old and New Testament. And instead of the word fool, they use the word infidel. And so there's, you know, it's a different translation, different languages, and that kind of stuff. And so there's the story of Christ in there, the Virgin Mary, that type of stuff's all in there. But the main thing, though, you'll see is there's a strong sense of, in there of personal responsibility, and they believe in one God, and they don't believe that he shares equality like we do, like with Christ, but that Christ would be the Son of God. So they have some similarities, but the main thing that I saw in there was that they teach this peace to the children. They teach self-control. They would be more legalistic than I would be about wine and things. That it says in Psalms 104 that God made it to cheer the hearts of man, and beer's mentioned in the Old Testament too. But it always said moderation, and it can't be that there wasn't any alcohol content to it, because Noah got drunk. I mean, why would it say don't be addicted to much of it if there was no alcohol in it? You can't get addicted to grape juice in the sense of a narcotic. And so, bottom line, that's an impossible argument, and I saw that at an early age. And so, but the teachings are about self-control. If you go to Buddhism, it's their teachings of being in control, and how they do it is getting out of yourself, self-denial. You go into the Jewish people always did teach self-denial. A lot of Christians that followed the early Christians' teachings have always taught personal responsibility, like it's taught here. There's a large crowd of those. There are more people out there than in the world, and that's why we live as peacefully as we do. Or otherwise, you would see Hinduism is a lot of copies. Gandhi was copying. He wouldn't use his name, but I mean, really took the writings of Jesus Christ, and of course, he was there with the Muslims and used a mixture of that, mixture of Christianity, a mixture of Hinduism, which was a teaching that there's one God, but you may get to God through various prophetic wise scholars or teachers or that type of thing. Plato, Socrates, all these guys, they copied the early rabbis and the early teachings of Moses. And so that's how a lot of these things, you've got to keep in mind how close you are there in Israel, of where it was able to reach China and, you know, the far Middle East, and then which would all, so much of India, it's not far away. And so people were going into these, you know, the Greeks translated all of the Hebrews writings into Greek, called the Septuagint. So you have this pool of information in Alexandria there, in that's in a very central location in the world. And then when the Western world, like the Western, started moving into Catholicism, Roman Catholicism, and Protestants, you know, then there was a different teaching that then came into America. A lot of America, though, was personal responsibility due to John Wesley. And John Wesley, the largest denomination was the old school of Methodists, and they kept that personal responsibility and self-control. Now, in the last years, we've been predominantly run by more of all that kind of went by the wayside because of a very strong teaching that it's all covered for you, and it's really kind of wrong that they would call it a work if you are personally improving yourself. And it's not. You are to be transformed, be born again. And so when we go in there and we are looking at so much of the world's religions, they're talking about self-control. They're talking about, and yet in Christianity, I was talking to a lady in India, and she's Hindu, and she was saying, yeah, the word on the street is here all over India, which is very large population, is do what the Christians say, but don't do as they do. And so that they're not living it out. And so isn't it all about living it out? Isn't it all, it's like these people like can talk it, they can sing it, they can put it out on a radio, they can come in and do all these things, but it's walking it out. And I would say that the Stites, the Martin family, I mean, you guys are exemplary in daily getting out of yourself and looking out for the needs of others. Isn't that true?
Imitation.
I am glad to
meditation.
My family, we travel together, we do so much together because we work so closely together. But for my children to see their children, I mean, don't leave mine behind. You know, I want them to be with your children and what they do, and they are your kids. Look again at their family. And Wesley and Caroline are absolutely the finest of children. So you've done it in every way. Your marriage, your household is always open, hospitable, working, and then they're blessed for it. You know, and I was there at a day that, you know, y'all were young and working up your careers but then God, when y'all put God's house first, He has blessed your family. I mean, financially, He has blessed you relationally, your health, and it isn't like you don't even have time for all that exercise. Well, if you do, I don't know where you're getting it from because we're together all the time. You're sneaking off to the gym or something. I don't know about it.
But I was sitting here thinking as you're saying all those things, I couldn't even really take any credit for anything besides just putting this into practice. And every year it gets better. Like that's what this morning I was just praying and thinking about this, and I thought it is mind-boggling that this only gets better. Like our marriage there's only more love to give. Like I've watched you live that way, and so I see you do it, and I'm thinking, well, if she can do it, I can do it. And there's like, you know, you've been married this long, and you have even more love. You have more attraction. You know, like you have more love for your kids. You have more time, and so the control. When I was living that way, it was so painful. Every day was just so frustrating. You know, it was just to get to the end of the day, and you're just depressed and frustrated, and you messed up again, and you just could never get anything right, and you had no time for anything. And now I feel like it's so the opposite, where there's so much time and there's so much fun and there's so many things to do, and the more you serve, the better you feel. You know, it's just reverse psychology, I guess, in a way. It's like it's the opposite of what you think that it would be if you gave up a little more time, you know, but God always gives it back. And you mentioned our finances. I know Patrick could say, but there's a 1-to-1 ratio. Every single time that we would give up, we would get it back. Like every time, you know, when you were building this church building and I would see how much you would give. And so we were like, well, let's just do that too. We're doing it too. And we would do it, and then we'd all of a sudden, you know, get something back. Or I know when I was working with you on the Treasure series, I, you know, watched you just work all hours of the day and the night. And so I just wanted to be right there, and I wanted to be in the middle of it and help. And so we did that, and in the middle of that process, Wesley, I came home and he was reading one day at 4 years old. God kept just taking care of every need, and every time you'd pray for something, somebody would give you exactly what you needed. And it was such a direct connection with God that it was just exhilarating in a way. You know, it's like you just want more of that. And I feel like it's still that way today. I feel like the more we give, or the more you get out of yourself, you don't have time for selfish stuff, you get it all back, even more than you expected, you know? And so you've always taught that, but it's just real. It really, really works. We've been living this way for 22 years, and it's not fake, it's real. It's the real thing every day, every hour of every week, and it just gets better.
It's amazing. Okay, if you were going to give the tip to people that they know they're controlling, this is calling their name, they know that they control their spouse, or they're scared. They feel like they've got to control, or they're going to lose what they really, really want to do. A lot of children can be controlling, spouses can be controlling, you know, whether it's the man or the female, the male or the female. Employees can be controlling to employers. So anyway, taking advantage of nice employers and stuff like that. So, I mean, you know, give us some tips that you all, you know, that helped, you know.
Read, wait on works. That's tip number one.
Good answer.
That's true. In all seriousness, chapter 19, I was looking at it again this morning. It was way down diet the first time I read it, but chapter 19 completely changed my life. I mean, the whole book changed my life, but I read that book so fast because it had so many answers. And then chapter 19 talked about the dead end path, and then it went into projection and then depression. And I was reading my life. I was like, well, it was a dead end path everywhere you went, except for just giving up the control and letting God be in control.
Was it scary?
It was. It was very scary. But it all made so much sense from your basic teachings on a carrot is a carrot is a carrot. I mean, that changed my life. There's a fat carrot and a skinny carrot. There's still a carrot. You know, that, or not, you know, God didn't put this food on earth to torture you. So it's, you know, he didn't make blue cheese dressing to torture. All your teachings just completely transform that. So I agree, just reading the materials and imitating the people that are doing it, to me, is huge, because you don't want to control your spouse anymore, but you don't really know else how to do it, you know? So you think, if I just get angry or cry or manipulate with a bad mood, maybe I'll get what I want. But if you figure out that God can give it to you without going through all of that, give you what you want with all the pain and the anger and the yelling it's so much better.
As you were talking a minute ago, I was thinking about sound bites or things that I've heard you say over the years that have had a real impact on my life. And one that I heard you say a while back was that it doesn't take a weak person to submit. It takes a very strong person to submit or to be submissive. And I've seen that in Amy, because she is a very strong person. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, she has a very deep faith, and it takes a great deal of strength to submit to somebody, even if it's a bad boss or a husband that, you know, may be ugly to you at some point, or even if you're a child and your parents are asking you to do something you don't want to do. It takes a lot of strength and a lot of faith to do that. And that's challenged me, you know, at work with submitting to my boss when there was something that maybe I didn't want to do, but he asked me to do. Even spiritually, there have been times that, you know, I've been challenged by other leaders in my actions or something I could have said or done differently. And the weak thing to do is to talk back. The strong thing to do, the faithful thing to do, is to submit. And obviously we learned that here, and we've watched it be put into practice. So I think that as far as any kind of a tip, I would just say, just look at people that you think are strong and watch the way that they deal with other people. They don't strong arm other people. They are humble in the way they deal with them, and they are gentle and kind. And it makes it so much easier, in my opinion, to do that. I mean, look at the life of Christ. He was not a bully. He was very humble and kind, and yet people wanted to, or at least the disciples wanted to submit to him. Those who were weak were the ones who fought back against him.
Look at this, Proverbs 16 says, better a patient man than a warrior, a man who controls his temper than one who takes a city. That's pretty powerful.
It is.
So better a patient man than a warrior. It lets you know that's who the stronger one is. It's the one that can control. A fool, it says in Proverbs 29:11, a fool gives full vent to his anger, but a wise man keeps himself under control. That's amazing. So, no, that's good stuff. Huh, David?
Oh, amazing. Your mind is racing to hear all this great stuff and try to summarize your thoughts in just a few words. And I guess just a couple of quick points. I remember back to some, those times when it's a very, very small group and Patrick and I would get together, and I hear what you're saying about the way you felt like it went, but the way I always knew that the Stites family as a whole were gonna, be fully in this and all that, because you were always willing to say, and this is a big one for everybody, because I'm sure women can have issues with this too, but it definitely is a man thing, for sure. You were willing to say, actually, I need to set this up. I'm gonna age myself here. If you grew up and you were watching TV in the late 70s, early 80s, there was this show on called Happy Days. And there was a character on there, his name was the Fonz. I know it sounds ridiculous to everybody younger, but it was. It was set in the 1950s, it was high school kids and all this. And I don't recommend it necessarily, but it brings this point to mind. This character, the Fonz, was known as the cool guy. He rode the motorcycle, the leather jacket, all the girls liked him, and he was never wrong. And the joke on the show was when he actually, the handful of times it was pointed out that he had made a mistake or he had taken the wrong side of an issue, and this is a comedy, so it was very lighthearted. He couldn't say, I was wrong. It was, I was, and people would laugh about that. That was us, you know? That was me before I heard this message. And then my eyes were opened, and I realized, oh my word, I've been song leader, I've been on the fast track to being a deacon and eventually an elder, a leader in the church, could work at a Christian record. I mean, all this stuff. And I hear Gwen speak, and it just one time, or just one filming of one video of Exodus from Strongholds. Oh my word, I'm wrong. And it was the same thing with you, Patrick, through all those lunches. And we would go back and forth and ask questions, and it was always, you were always willing to say, I see what you're saying. I could be wrong about that. And that seed of humility has carried you. And now y'all are two of the most humble people that I've ever known in my life. And so that's point number one. The other thing would be something truly for everybody. And it goes back to Gwen and Amy and y'all's first comments that you were making and talking about self going back and forth. And that is about what we're putting in our eyes, in our ears. Because especially for those who are newer, or if you're joining us on Facebook Live or whatever, you might come to this for a first time, or you've been exposed to this a little bit, maybe you've been through one class, and you might say, well, you know, the friends I hang around with or the churches I've been to, I hear them talk about God and Jesus and submission. I hear Paul, I hear Peter. There's a lot of words that sound the same. I even hear the word submit. I hear about being godly. I hear about a godly household. But where have those results gotten you? If the end goal is to be standing in line on Judgment Day and for God to say, well done, good and faithful servant, and yet everywhere you've been and all the self-help and all the books and the psychiatrists and the psychologists and the church counseling programs, if all they've done, back to Gwen's original point, has led you to focus more on yourself, and the key to getting into heaven is to be completely out of yourself, where are you? Where are you really? I mean, where are you really? And so even though a lot of the words, and this is, go back and listen to anything Gwen's ever said about counterfeit religion or counterfeit anything, or it may sound good, but if the results don't back it up, if the testimonies, if the results don't back it up, then it's not there, it's not true, you need to run away. And so just an encouragement for everybody, if you're hearing this and you want this life, or if you've been coming for a while and you see the 10 pounds, the 50, the 100, the 200, 300, people laying down cigarettes, antidepressants, marriages coming back together, finances being healed, sexual sins, men addicted to sports where it affects their moods. The list goes on. And you've seen person after person and couple after couple come up here, and it's changed and it's not fake. They're exactly the same behind closed doors as what you see right now, talking to however many thousands of people we're talking to. And there's a church full of these people, then something has to be right. And if the results of what you've been reading and what you've been watching have gotten you where you are, then you have to be willing to go in and say, like I did, like Amy did, like Patrick did, like all of us did, you know what? I could be wrong. I could be wrong. And that was the beginning of me being set free. I still remember the first thing that I was set free. I was 35 pounds heavier. I didn't realize it. I mean, my eyes were open to it as you taught it. The first thing that I was set free from, nod to the guys, was this obsession with sports. Like my mood, and some of you may have heard this before, so I apologize for repeating, but for the men out there, my mood would be altered. I mean, there was a football game that happened last weekend and there was a bad call. And people are filing lawsuits like it has affected their happiness. They are literally asking for damages over a football game. Well, you know what? I probably would have been right there with them back then. I was a fanatic. Fan, I was not a fan, I was a fanatic. Fan is short for fanatic. So all that to say, fill in the blank with whatever you've struggled with. I know tonight it's been a whole thing about control, and a lot of that for a lot of us has been food and overeating, but whatever you've been putting in your eyes and your ears and your mouth, if it's left you not like what you are here, then say, you know what, I've been wrong. I've just been wrong. It's fun. it's a do-over. Let's just have a do-over. And Gwen, you've always said, you probably say it every other show, the only thing you can do wrong when you're introduced to this is quit. The only thing you can do wrong is quit. So
That's
you're
right.
here for a reason. You're listening and watching for a reason. You have another chance. Don't quit. Admit we've been wrong. It hasn't hurt us. So we're happier for it. And just thank you. Thank you for taking your time, because it would have been very easy for Gwen to not expose herself and her family to the opposition that has come over the years. And there's been a lot. Many more people have heard this and have tried to argue with its fruit, have tried to argue with Gwen doctrine, have tried to argue and telling her why she's wrong, yet all the results come from putting that into practice. I can't fathom that, but that's the pride. That's the not being willing to admit you're wrong. And so I'm thankful that a couple of guys who grew up in a very conservative church denomination, who were fast-tracked to being church leaders, boy, that fills you up real quick. Ooh, being promised things, and people they want your opinion. Whew. In America, in the South, in the church, man, that's intoxicating. But I'm telling you, it wasn't leading me anywhere good. It wasn't leading me anywhere good. I'm so glad to be rid of that. And so thank you. And thank you guys for putting it into practice.
Thank you.
Y'all become examples to follow.
I can't tell you how close I am to everybody up here on this stage, and all of you out there that are doing the will of God. Jesus said, "Who are my mother, my brother, and my sisters?" And I'm telling you, we are close because we're all in this together. What I want you to take from this tonight is, there are a lot of things. Go back and watch it again and again, but and to imitate their lives. But I sat there and watched Amy let go of that control, Patrick change, all of us change. I mean, literally, it's real. Like Amy was saying, it's real. And you just walk it out. If tonight you want to control your spouse, or you want to control your eating, you want to give it over to God. Give it to the God that can tell you what to eat and how much to eat. Give it to God. Your fears, give it to God. Just give it to God. And you think, well, maybe he's too busy, or the telephone lines are too, there's too much going on. But you think there's a big cloud here with information. The cloud that God's got is capable of taking all of our information, processing it, and getting back to us. Seconds, answered prayers. Seconds. Why don't we go to him? Let go of control, go to him. You pick it back up 5 minutes later, let go of control, go to him. Do it a minute later, let go of control, go to him. Let go of control. Amy did. She's now free from have to exercising. Their marriage is great. Patrick let go of the control of, we're not going to go here. We're going to, and let spiritual things happen with Amy. Letting go of control. David Martin had a whole career and all this kind of stuff and was going a different direction, and let go of control. God's always called me to let go of control, but it's always been better. What he's got is better. Do you believe? It's going to take that belief. But I want you to know, we all were believers and we're better for it. And the same will happen to you. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next.
You can overcome. Open heaven, angels dance 'cause they're free. Be seen for eternity with our God and His Son Jesus. Everything is peaceful and gladness. Happy always doing His will. Happy always doing His will. Dance 'cause they're free, happy sing for eternity with our God and His Son Jesus. Everything is peaceful and gladness. Happy always do